That's mine, guys. That's mine. Are the Spill and Jars people nice?
They are German.
They're German.
I wasn't sure you were German.
I'm sure they crack jokes all week long.
Okay, does anybody want
Kind of
a
like Howell
lollipop
from
because they were on the
2001.
table?
That's left over from the welcome panel.
So I'm wondering if anybody wants one, I'll throw it at you.
Yes.
Yes.
Dinner and a show.
Oh, sorry.
Anybody in front, duck? Anyone wants still want pies? Yes. Yeah, hell yeah.
Jess, am I allowed to request specific flavors?
Oh, sorry. Gross. Eventually it was inevitable that somebody was going to get hit. This is not the best choice, but
Are you playtesting this game during the dexterity blocks tomorrow?
no, I'm going to be in a swim meet.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen. We just did swimming, not softball. We're fine.
It's true, I coached swimming, not softball. Were there any more hands? I've got one
I'll
more.
take a second one.
Sweet.
Yes. Oh yeah. Do it.
Nice job, Will.
Hey. Okay. All right.
And with that, it's 9:30. I will stay away from everybody, but so that you can understand me, I am Jess. I am one of the hosts of tonight's Feedback Frenzy. The other is my other half, Schoon. I'm sorry that you have to deal with him, but to get me, you had to have him. So, good luck.
Fair trade.
Is it really though? So our first person is
Dan Schumacher.
If you can come over here, we will get you set up, or you can have your stuff set up here, and then we'll introduce you to the peoples. So yeah, the way Feedback Frenzy is going to work is each presenting designer will have approximately 3 minutes to pitch their design to publishers and Randy.
Manufacturers.
And Jay. And manufacturers. But either way, no matter who's going to be up here, it's going to be fun. It'll be great. There will be a brief period of time for questions from them and then answers, and we will see where the evening takes us. We have 7 designers tonight scheduled, and so you will get to see lots of different things.
All right, but to start, first round of applause. Yes. So starting with our esteemed judges, this event is sponsored by All Play. So if I can put. They're all pitching, but quick, like 30 seconds, Joe. What is it that you do that brings you to something like this and that makes you want to participate in this insanity?
All Play, formerly BoardGameTables.com. We make high-quality tables, great board game bags, and we publish 7-ish games a year. Last time I was UNPUB, I signed 3 titles, 2 of which have come out, and 1 is going to Kickstarter in October.
Nice.
I love supporting the design community. I love seeing new games in development. And most of all, I love telling people that their prototypes are bad.
Oh.
Thank you one more time to All Play for sponsoring. We're going to skip Randy and jump over to Jay. Jay, can you give us again a quick blurb? Welcome so much to our judges bench today. What is it that brings you to UNPUB and gets you to participate in this craziness?
Yeah. I am Jay Bell. I work for Panda Game Manufacturing as a pre-press specialist. I'm also a game designer and graphic designer, so I have a lot of experience pitching games, knack for public speaking, and I like giving feedback to all the people out there that I am much like. So yeah.
Round of applause for Jay. Last but not least, Randy from the, I don't know if I can still say West Coast, Best Coast, since we have recently moved, but West Coast, Best Coast, Randy Flynn, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Game designer from Seattle, and I've been a frequenter of UNPUB rooms at conventions since PAX Unplugged 2017, I believe. So it's definitely been a key part of the designs I've come up with, both the Breeze, which was what I brought first, and Cascadia. So I've spent a lot of time in UNPUB rooms, both just the standard playtesting and the lovely after-hours communication with designers, which has kind of been some of my favorite parts.
Tell them about the spiel de
What is that?
Would you like to remind
Is that German?
And yet again, continuing the tradition of UNPUB special guests who are also Spiel winners and well loved by our tight-knit community. Thank you, Randy. We're all set with game number 1. All right, also
And voila.
Number 1.
insert your own sound effects.
Oh no, we lost a judge!
Would that work for anyone in this section?
Didn't know it was an illusionist too.
So, Nick Alexander, if you could bring your game over here to get it set up. Yes, judges, you can direct your attention this way. And would you like a microphone or?
Oh, I think I should be alright. Can everyone back there hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Should I begin?
Yeah, go for it.
Alright, so hello everyone, my name is Dan Schumacher. I'm a video game developer. This is my first foray into making board games. First time pitching a board game, so I apologize if I'm not doing anything properly, but here goes nothing. This is my game Overlapper Mappers. It's a game for 1 to 5 players, takes place in about 15 to 20 minutes. The components are 52 poker cards, 20 wooden meeples, and they all fit in a small box, a little smaller than this even. How the game works is basically you're in charge of relocating 4 different animals. There's beavers, elks, hawks, and fish. How you do that is you take turns drawing these little landscape cards that are divided into 4 different habitats, and you place them onto a shared map. How you'll do so is you will place them either adjacent to other cards, or, as the name suggests, you can overlap some of the cards, and that will create groups of habitats. Like here we've got a group of 3 lakes, and after you've placed your card, you may optionally place one of your creatures onto one of the 4 tiles on the card you just played. So a fish can only go in water, of course, so you could put it there to claim that group. No one else can claim that group, and then the game kind of continues. Next player will go. They'll place theirs onto the map. Again, they're going to be placing one of their 4 creatures, and the game will continue so on for 7 rounds. It's fairly quick. There's a few different kind of strategies that develop throughout. Sometimes you might want to just be adding to an existing group, or kind of building a new group that's beneficial. Or you might want to overlap part of an opponent's group to cut them out completely. It's very rude, but you're allowed to play like that. Then, once all the cards have been played, so 14 in a 2-player game for 7 rounds, the game ends. Scoring now begins, and how that works is each of these creature cards has different scoring conditions. For example, this fish here will just score 1 for each lake in its group. So from the example that I started with, this fish is in a group of 3, so you would score 3 points for that. Pretty simple. Then there's other scoring conditions like an elk who scores 1 for each forest that's in the same row or column as that elk. And then there's other ones, there's 4 of each animal every single time, and they can all be placed in the same habitats every time. Fish can only ever go in fish or in lakes. But then there's different variable, like there's 4 different hawk versions that each have a different scoring mechanism. So basically the game takes place pretty quickly, and then hopefully you're enjoying it and you want to try some of the different combinations. And that is pretty much the game. I hope we have plenty of time for feedback and questions. I'm very eager to hear. Yeah.
Sweet, well done. Can I start us off? All right, and I'm so sorry. Remind me of your name?
Dan.
Dan. Well done for a first pitch. Thank you, first of all, for coming up here and being brave enough to pitch your game in front of all of us. You hit the major marks really early. You gave out the player count, the time that it takes. You gave us an idea of what's going to happen when you're playing the game, right? You hit kind of the key things that you want to hit in a pitch. So I'll just stop there for now.
Thank you.
I think what Jay said is really right. I think you started off very well presenting, what kind of game it is and who it's targeted at, how long it will play, general components. So let me ask you a question. Kind of the next step in this is what is the tension in this game? What are the interesting decisions and why is doing this creating competition that's not just take that? Because I feel like there's a little more than take that in this game, even though it's clearly a key component.
Yeah, so the tension kind of comes into building a map. Like as you play, kind of depending on the scoring conditions, there might be a few different ways you can kind of approach how you're going to play, and then there's kind of 4 different scoring mechanics in each one. So where the tension kind of comes in is sometimes it is beneficial to add to your own groups. Other times it's beneficial to cut off other people's, as I said earlier. But what's interesting is there's a rule where you're only allowed to overlap up to 2 tiles at a time. So you can't just put a card right in the middle of the map and completely ruin everyone's thing. You can really only mess with the edges of the map. And so that adds kind of another layer of sometimes it's beneficial to expand your territory on the edges to protect your area. And then kind of the pace of the game happens quick enough that it's not always worth spending a card to ruin someone else's game. And then you have to kind of think very carefully, what are you going to do with this 1 of 7 cards that you will play during the game?
So as a publisher that has to, as a publisher that needs to look at 250 prototypes a year, right? And at conventions, usually I'll make time to sit down with dozens and dozens of designers. A bunch of people in this room have pitched to me at many conventions, right? There are 3 things that I want to hear first and foremost. The first thing I want to hear is thematically give me your game, right? And from a thematic standpoint, I want you to thematically give me what your game is trying to accomplish. The second thing I want to hear is who is this game for, right? What is the audience for this game from your perspective? And then the third thing I want to hear is what makes your game special. And I think you definitely hit all of those things, but I would definitely move those things up to the very front thing of the pitch, right? Before player count, before how long it takes, before what components, because a lot of that stuff, the design and development and publisher are going to make a lot of decisions there. But what we really want to hear is thematically, where is your game at? Who is your game for, and what makes it special? Because we need to be sold from the get-go, right? And we need to see your game stand out above other ones that we've looked at. And those 3 things are going to be the main questions that we're asking. So you hit all of those throughout your pitch, but my one piece of feedback would be bring it all up to the front.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. You could have told me that last year, Joe.
All right, anything else for Dan Schumacher today? Thank you, Dan, so much. Remove our magic screen for Nick Alexander and Wind and Walls. Woo.
How y'all doing?
Hi, Nick.
Hi.
Hi.
As you said, my name is Nick Alexander, and this game is Wind and Walls. In this game, you take on the persona of one of the 4 winds. It's best to kind of think about the game as almost an inverse of Hungry Hungry Hippos. So you have one side of the board, and all you can do is push things away from your side of the board. And that is how you encompass the persona of Wind. You are pushing one column at a time away from your side of the board. If you push balls off the side of the board, you get 2 points. But if someone pushes balls off your side of the board, you lose 1 point. And in this game, you start with a hand of 5 cards. And let me explain this first. The walls, at the very beginning of the game, you go around clockwise. To determine turn order, it is whoever is the best whistler. Creative way to get Wind involved in how you determine turn order. and you place the walls do not move, and you cannot blow a ball through the walls. And being that you can only move this direction, that's where the interesting part of gameplay starts, because when you have it against a wall, you kind of are going to need someone else to interact with your problem in order to solve it, unless you are lucky enough to draw a special card that gives you the ability to do an updraft, which will lift your ball over the wall and to the other side. In the game, there is no physical blowing. I always get that question. You draw 5 cards. Those cards will be 1 through 4, a wild card, or a special card. And if you have 3 or more of any single card, you can play them as a combo together. So if you have 4 ones, you can move 1 row, 4 spaces at once, and discard those 4 cards. And one of the more interesting parts of the game is that you will always draw your hand back up to 5 at the end of your turn. And one of the cooler things with the rule interactions is if you happen to go negative, if someone scores on you when you have no points, you then get an increased hand size, which will allow you to do much more interesting combos and actually get back in the game, which I think is really fun that you can't get snowballed out of the game. The more you are losing, the more likely you are to make a comeback. And so a lot of the design of the game is specifically to kind of be fluid. I tried to make sure that nothing was too perfect and that everything kind of had a waviness to it and a natural artistic feel. I think a lot of games these days are particularly digital, so it's fun to get involved with hand-painted stuff. And essentially the goal of the game is to get to 5 points by pushing balls off the other side of the board and not having too many balls come back your direction. And there's a lot of special interactions that you can do along the way using these cards. Returning balls directly back to the beginning center area of the board would be called a whirlwind, and kind of playing on some of the fundamentals that's already been laid out by like Magic the Gathering and stuff like that. Along with doing a whirlwind effect, you may discard any number of cards from your hand, which is going to allow you to draw an entire new hand. And as you move around the board, play tends to increase in speed when people get a little bit more used to this game. And honestly, it can be over in 15 minutes. And I've had kids of the age 8 and above play this game with absolutely no problem. And you can explain it to most people in the amount of time I've just explained it to you. And thank you for listening to me. I really appreciate it.
I guess we'll go this way.
Yeah.
Do you feel like this is mostly an abstract game?
I could see that for sure, especially when you're explaining that you're pushing objects and blowing wind without actually doing that physically. It can feel that way, but it's it seems a little bit more concrete than that to me when you're playing it.
Yeah, I like the theme. I like the concept. One thing that my mind kept gravitating to is, it's very flat, and I wish there was a way that you could find a way to like make things move almost naturally. Like, is there a version of this game that works with marbles or something like that, where you can actually like manipulate the board, and not necessarily by physical blowing, but like give people the feeling of like the components actually moving with that kind of fluidity or something like that. Yeah. That's like the thing that like my mind instantly gravitated to. Is one thing that might make this stand out for a publisher is when you can kind of like put them into the game and not see it as like a flat thing, but see it as a thing that's actually moving and fluid with the theme of the game. Mm-hmm. So that would just be like my one thing, that looking at this, I don't know that the componentry matches the theme as well as maybe you could figure it out with some, re-implementations of stuff.
All right, yeah.
Joe, I actually want to start with a question for you about that, which I think is interesting from a pitching standpoint. I think some people might listen to your feedback and think, well, wait, isn't that really the job of the publisher to look at a game and think about that? So I'm curious what your reaction to that would be.
That's coming from an SBJ winner.
Yeah. I mean, when you are pitching to a publisher, right, like your game has to stand out. and it has to have something about it that makes me as a publisher go, ooh, I'm really excited about this, right? And if you can't have your prototype bring that element to it, it's very much likely going to be another prototype that got looked at. Whereas if you can make your prototype feel and stand out and go, oh, what was that game with those like marbles that moved about wind and everything like that? Like, I'm going to go back from a convention and be like, man, that game really stuck in my brain.
And that's kind of the sort of answer I expected from Joe. When I first started designing games, a lot of it was, don't spend much effort on how it looks. Don't spend much effort on this or that or the other thing. You want to get the mechanics working because the publisher's going to figure all of that out. But the point is here, we already publish thousands of games every year. And I don't know what the multiplier is on how many are pitched, but it's obviously many times that.
Yeah.
And so you need it to stand out, or you need it to show itself. So like I found myself quickly starting to spend a lot more time on graphic design when I thought it helped the game pop, when I felt that it helped the players get into it. That's a little different than what Joe's saying as a publisher, but it actually has a lot of similarity. If you can get a player to go into it and get excited about it, you're much more likely for the publisher when you're pitching it to kind of see the same thing.
Yeah.
So I think that actually is incredibly important. So.
Look at me up here just learning stuff from the other judges. So I have one piece of feedback about the pitch itself. I felt like I was getting a lot of information without sort of pauses or enough time to process this part of the game or this part of the game.
Yeah.
And you started out really strong with your reference to a game that just about everybody who's ever played a game has played, with Hungry Hippos. That was a great way to sort of ground me in, okay, this is Hungry Hippos in reverse. How is it different? How is it fun? But after that, there was sort of not a path that you kept pushing us down, not to make a wind reference. Anyway, so I think just continuing to practice, what we mentioned in the first pitch. We want to know, why is it unique? What's it going to do? Who's it for? How's it played? And just be very deliberate about the way you tell the story of your game. And then my question for you actually is, did the theme come first, or did you sort of think about this mechanic of moving things in?
So this is the first time I've ever pitched this to not my family. So I was a little nervous. And I left out one of the key components is that as wind, when you are blowing one column, you affect every ball that's in that column. So the more the board scatters and crosses itself, you'll start aligning balls accidentally, but you can move all at once.
Yeah.
And that is the real reason that it's wind, is so that you get that kind of cross-draft ability in the game.
Yeah.
So that's where essentially that came from.
Yeah.
The reason that I asked that question is because as a game designer, and I think as publishers probably as well, Joe can probably tell you, we have this history and we have experiences of when we, have designed games and how we move through that process. So when you talk about your pitch, I thought about games that I've designed and how I've added things in or adjusted things to be more thematic or be more serving to the mechanics. And I think it's important to keep that in mind when you're giving your pitch. Be very descriptive about how these things work. Talk about why you chose to do this thing and why it makes the game more fun. Because I think the publishers are going to be able to relate to that more and understand that you've given this a lot of thought and iteration, and there's a lot of work that's gone into it.
There's one more piece of advice that I thought about that would really help this game in particular, but every game. And it's kind of a note that we have from more at our demo staff and running demos at convention. If anyone's seen our booth at conventions, we are demo forward, right? Is we want people to have the best experience with a demo in a short amount of time. And one thing that you didn't do at all, which I think this game would lend itself towards really, really well, is when you're describing how actions work, move the pieces on the board.
Yeah.
Blow the pieces around the board. And when this happens, I can do this. And then if I did this thing, then I can do this. And like build yourself like a little like, okay, when I show this game, I'm going to set it up this way because I can perform these different actions and perform really cool combos or really cool things that I've seen happen in the game, and just like build that experience for the publisher. And that's something that like when you're running demos, you're like, okay, we're going to use these goals because they're the easiest, most satisfying goals in the game that players can get into really easy and have the best experience with. But that's what you're trying to do, is you're trying to build like an ideal experience. And in a pitch, it works the same way. It's like building ideal situations so that you're like, when you're like, okay, so when I do this, I get to do that. And you're like, and a publisher will go, oh, cool. Because like keeping them engaged, that physical, you know, like manipulation of the board would be very helpful.
And that's actually, I really appreciate that. That's great feedback because it only looks like this before you start playing. And then as soon as you do start playing, everything is moving and gets scattered, which I think probably lends people to being a little bit more engaged into it.
All right, thank you again, Nick Alexander. Can you hold up the board?
Yeah.
And next we have Jean Koo with Sticker Doodle Town, which I'm very excited to hear more about.
So winter has been cold and dull, and all the color has drained from the land, kind of like this year. And the only thing that can help bring color back is a sheet of stickers and markers. So I'm Jean Koo. I'm the designer of Sticker Doodle Town. And in Sticker Doodle Town, up to 5 players work together to bring color to the land by using their stickers, and colors. Working with, to imagine a colorful world together by sticker doodling places and people. And here's how that works. Everybody on all at the same time, get cards which have prompts on them that ask you to look at, for example, right here we've got the scientist. And the scientist is studying something. What you're going to do is you look at your sticker sheet and you say, well, what is that scientist studying? And the stickers give you an idea of a graphical image, but it's not a complete picture. So what you got to do is take a sticker that you think matches that, what is the science studying, stick it on there, and then you take your marker and you finish the rest of the picture. So you're pulling together your verbal and your graphic imagination to tell that story of what the scientist is studying. Then you take that, you pass it to the next player, and they look at the second prompt, and the scientist just doesn't understand something. What don't they understand? We're going to take the sticker and figure that out. Now you're starting to share a story together because you've taken the person next to you and you've added your story to their story. The sticker and the doodle. And I've had players tell me that it's basically a lot like Mad Libs with pictures. You're using your imagination to fill in the story and give it life. So like Mad Libs, one of the things that's kind of cool about this project is you can adapt it to any genre. So right now this is like a Stardew Valley, pastoral fantasy kind of idea, but you can also go dragon fantasy or sci-fi. Also really works well with different kind of license ideas because you just adapt the pictures and the stickers to whatever's appropriate to the IP. And most of all, it's affordable and accessible. We're talking about sheets of paper and stickers, but the imagination comes from the table working together, telling that story together. So what I can imagine is you can imagine it in the hobby shop where you go and you get your $200 worth of Warhammer toys, and you got to figure out, well, what am I bringing home to the kids? And so there's a way you can market that. Or you can think of it as an activity book in the mass market, where books like this with stickers in them could be a lot more interesting if they were gamified. Most of all, though, what I really imagine is that the families are there imagining together. Because what's really important to me is the way that we can help foster that imagination. Because when I started this out, the idea of the stickers is actually, it was a drawing game, and the idea of the stickers was to give players, especially children, the idea of, well, how big should your picture be when you're drawing? So the stickers were really a boundary to kind of constrain what the kids are doing. But the more I was testing, the more I realized what it was also doing was it was expanding and giving, especially adults, permission to imagine. That until the stickers came along, a lot of them said, I can't draw, I don't want to draw. But doing the stickers all of a sudden opened up the world to them, that they could be able to do what their kids are doing, which is drawing and imagining from their minds. So that's what I really hope that we'll be able to accomplish with something like Sticker Do It Town. Oh.
For that pitch, I did a really clever thing here by using the components and giving us, the judges, and in most cases the publishers, the actual components to feel and touch and look and etc. I could take it a step further, where this is a game where you could allow us to actually go through that turn, right?
Oh yeah.
At a pitch, you could have publisher A or number one do the first action, pass it along to the next publisher, etc. When your game is capable of doing that in a very quick time period, take them through a turn of the game if you can, because it instantly gives you the chance to show them how strong and unique the game is. I think this game is also in a very interesting position where you never really had to mention who this game is for. It's very clear, and you also spoke about how expandable it is, which is a very strong point for publishers. They want to keep making money off of the same thing that's working. So yeah, I think focusing in on those points is a very strong thing for this game.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think Jay covered a really a key thing that I was thinking of as well, which is I wanted to see it in action. And you did describe it pretty well, and yet still, I want to see it in action. And that's a good thing, that it spoke to me that way. But kind of seeing how it played out, I think would be incredibly interesting to tell. And I would say that from your pitch, I felt the sticker part was clear, but I got a little lost on the drawing part. So I didn't quite follow that entirely. But when you finished and talked about the bit of basically adults who didn't want to be so creative, that actually resonates with me personally a lot. It's happened in a number of different kind of party style games where if it's entirely free form, I'm like, peace out. I'm not. This isn't really for me. But once there's a little more guidance, as to what's going, I can actually open up and do it. So I think that was to me, that was a really strong point of the game. And I think you could even emphasize that, I don't know, I think that's a strong emphasis, the bit that you were talking about with, kids might be a little more free-form and they're like, okay, if I can do this, and I can bring in the adults, because I think that's really true at a pretty high percentage, not everyone, obviously. So yeah.
So I put the sticker on I take a sticker off of my sheet, I add it to the character that I have, I pass it to someone else who then puts their own sticker on it. Is that right?
That's right.
And what happens with that? What is the next step of the game?
Yeah. So I've just given you the first thing, right? So that you're creating a place, you create people, and then you start creating stories. You get other cards that are adding more and more stickers and doodles to the world as you go.
Okay, so
there's a whole element of gamifying with this in terms of what colors you use, so that you slowly add more and more colors, and they spread with each other.
Okay, so is there kind of a so how much of this would you say, percentage wise, is story versus mechanics?
80-20.
Story versus mechanics. Okay.
Yeah.
The second thing I wanted to ask you about is this is a disposable game. It's a game that gets used up, gets done, and then you can't really play it again. There's not a reset to a game that you're coloring on and using stickers on, right? And for a lot of publishers, that's kind of a sticking point. So one thing I wanted to commend One thing I wanted to commend you on, and I would say lean as hard as you can in your pitches to this, is, oh, this is going to be the same price as a coloring book, right? This is the same price as a coloring book, but it's a game that you can play with your children. Like that is where you're going to find the audience on, because something like this could like take off on Amazon for a publisher. Something like this could be in mass-produced things everywhere, right? And that's what I would lean into, is be like, hey, you've seen coloring books. This is a coloring book like you've never seen before, right? Like the marketing kind of writes itself, right? And it makes for great ads, it makes for great everything. And so I would just say lean as hard as you can into like, hey, here's a coloring book that you play.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, so it's Gene Coogan with Stickerdoodle Town, and now we've got Mel Walker with Mew.
Sir?
Mew or Mew? Like
Mew.
the Pokemon.
Not Mew.
Mew. He's masked, I'll tell you why.
It's not
N-I-U, Mew.
Yes.
Take it away, Mel.
I don't need a microphone. I'm a teacher.
There you go.
I'm Mel Walker. I'm an English, humanities, and theater teacher, and this game grew out of needing to have more collaborative stuff for my students to do during the COVID times. So I made up a game, laminated the cards. I do not recommend doing that, so I set them all out. And then we found out it's actually really fun to play. So Niu is the Old Norse word for 9. So the object of the game is to collect 9 Norse gods into your pantheon. And so the game can be played 4 to 6 players. We've discovered seems to be the best. And it is adaptable. So if you have 6 players, you don't want to spend as much time playing, you can lower the number down to 6 or 3 gods, because 3 was a number that was sacred to the Norse. So any multiple of 3 would work. You start out the game, everybody gets 4 cards, and then at the start of your turn, you draw 2 cards and you do 2 actions. And so your actions can be putting a god into your pantheon. And we've color-coded all the gods and all the cards, because when I play games, I like to be able to scan the table and very quickly see what's out there. So gods are purple, so you can put a god in your pantheon. You can play an action card, which are red, and there are 2 different action cards. Some are just general cards, like the Norns, which today the fates are kind. When you play this card, you take 1 card from another player's pantheon. So you can play that. Or there are some action cards that are specific to the gods you have in your pantheon. So I have Loki, so I can play the Tricks of Loki, which is make 1 player discard all of the male god cards from their pantheon, because Loki wants to convince Thor to dress as a woman. So you would lose all of your cards. The other thing you can do for one of your actions is we have a few defense cards, because we found out when we first started playing the game, it was too evil. So there are some defense cards which are runes. The protective runes can also be placed down and guard your pantheon and your actions. And so the nice thing about this game is it can be as kind or as evil as you want it to be. Last week I had 2 groups of students playing it. One group was very nice and they had a good time, and the other group started swearing, and one said, "This is like Mario Kart and I hate you all, but I can't stop playing." So it's one of those games where depending on how evil you are, it can last anywhere from 30 minutes to 60 minutes depending on how people want to play the game. And because I hate having paper directions, all the directions fit on 2 little cards.
That was nothing like Pokemon. I guess congratulations on figuring out how to keep teenagers entertained.
Yeah.
So that's alone just a feat in and of itself. One thing that you did mention that I did want to talk about is it can be as mean or as nice as you want to. The card game, it's all about getting a certain number of gods into your pantheon to win. And you had mentioned that it plays up to 60 minutes. Do you feel like the game time is a little long for what the game that you're playing is?
Yes, and that's why we made it adaptable. All 9 gods, it goes very long, and you reach a point of like, oh, for the love of God. We also, there is another way that you can end the game early. There is a Ragnarok card, and there is only one, because there is only one end of the world. And so on the card itself, you can destroy one person's entire pantheon in hand, or you can say whoever plays Ragnarok, the game just ends, and whoever has the most gods wins at that point. So if you want it to take a long time, it can, or you can set it up to be a shorter game.
A lot of the things that you mentioned in your pitch had a lot to do with like educational background and bases. Would you say that if a publisher wanted to pick this up, this would be something where they could do a lot of different pantheons of gods and use it as an educational tool?
Absolutely, and actually my friend JP, who did all the graphic design on this, that's something we've actually talked about. It is very easily adaptable to Greek or Egyptian, and I may have already made an Egyptian one for them to play as well. So it is very adaptable to, you could literally take the same game mechanic and use with multiple different pantheons of gods.
Cool, you just sold your game to history buffs.
I wanted to drill down a little bit on the game time a little bit more in a different way, though. So coming from someone who's but one of the things I found is that people do kind of want to get an idea for how long the game plays. This can be different if you're playing Age of Steam or 18FX games where people are very tolerant of, hey, it's going to take 2 hours to 12 hours, and we know that. But when you get to a game that's typically between like 20 and 60 minutes, people kind of want to know, and so such variation can be a difficult sell. So I think this is an area that's very interesting as a designer, because I know you threw out some thematic references for the 369, but it might be an area where repeated playtesting can really help you dial in, where you say, hey, we can actually dial this in so that the playtime is between, just to pick two numbers, 30 and 45 minutes. If we say at 3 players it's this, at 4 players, and the various things. That's to me, I think there are some people probably in this room who can throw up an Excel spreadsheet and start, calculating such things. I'm not that person. I'm the one who throws it at a bunch of playtests and tries to pay very close attention to how things go, and can usually eventually intuit that kind of information from it. So that's something to think about, especially if you got that kind of feedback from publishers saying, the variable playtime. I'm not sure we want to see that.
Yeah, thank you, Mel. I have 2 questions. Yeah, my first question. You mentioned that there's 9 different gods in the game, and that they're all color-coded. As a graphic designer and a game designer, I wanted to ask also, is there sort of coding that's also friendly for players with color deficiencies that they would be able to still recognize?
Yes, so actually that was something we wanted to take into account. So all of the god cards have a border along the edge, and then all of the action cards do not. And the ones that are specific to the gods just have the god icon up in the corner. So if you do not have any issues with color, you have the color coding, and if you do, all of the cards have different borders or things along the top. So it's still easy to scan and see.
Great. And then my second question, as you continue to describe the game and talk about it, I could only, I couldn't help but think about, this reminds me of X game, where you're trying to build your own sort of tableau or area, but you're also knocking out other players' area, making their life hard. What would you say is the one thing that sort of sets your game apart? What is that one thing that would make me want to pick up this game on the shelf as opposed to another?
I feel like all of the action cards, especially if you're unfamiliar with Norse mythology, I've not seen them in other games. Like, for example, the Jotun card, you make 2 players completely swap their hands. But if one of them defends, you have to swap your hand. So I think it's a lot of the action cards aren't the typical game action because they are specific to the Pantheon.
Hi, yeah, I like it. Thank you.
Thank you again to Mel with Niu. And at the same time, if we can get Andrew Ernst to table 2, while we introduce our next game, Jess.
So on this side, we have Travis with Favor of the Gods. So you were building your pantheon. Now you are creating, I'm sorry, I forgot the most majority of that, but you're at Mount Olympus with gods. So I will let you explain it better.
Hello. As you said, my name is Travis, and this is Favor of the Gods. In the land of ancient Greece, the noblest of all men have set their sights on a journey to the top of Mount Olympus, where the gods themselves reside. Into the world of Favor of the Gods, set in ancient Greece, they'll take the role of a nobleman seeking to prove his worth to the gods to join them on Mount Olympus. You must fight, pray, and offer skulls of your enemies to gain the admiration of the gods and earn your place amongst them. As you journey through the land of Greece, you'll encounter rivals, temples, wild boar, and more. You will use your private deck of cards to unleash powerful abilities, gain the favor of the gods, and rest to regain your strength. You must choose your actions wisely, as the gods' favor is a limited resource, and you'll need cunning to outwit your opponents. Only the first player to prove their worth through strength, merit, and devotion will be welcomed to Mount Olympus, where eternal paradise awaits. So gather your hoplites, and pray that the gods show their favor to you as you try to earn the place of The gameplay overview of this game is it is a hand management area control game. Kind of built into it. On your turn, you can do one of 4 actions, as you can see on the reference. You can play one of the cards that you start with in your hand. You can do a peaceful move using the Trojan horse. You can do Apollo's chariot. So you can play an action card for its effect, or you can discard it as an offering to the god's favor. Each god's favor allows you to do better in their domain. So, for example, when you look at the bottom left of that card, Ares is the god of war. So when you gain his favor, he helps you in combat. You're better at combat for the rest of the game. If you gain Hephaestus' favor, he's the god of defense, god of the forge. So he helps you be stronger in combat and defense. Then we have Apollo, who's the god of the sun, and he helps you move across the board further, gives you more daylight, allows you to help you move across land. We have Poseidon, who's the land of the sea, helps you move across water, so on and so forth. You can also offer skulls to the gods. There's 2 ways to get skulls in the game. One way is you could fight your opponents, but they're pretty hard to fight back. Or you could fight wild boar. And wild boar don't have much of a fence, don't put up much of a fight, but they also don't give you much of a reward. When you gain skulls, they go on these little spikes, and you can spend those to offer to the gods to fulfill their bloodlust. When you offer the skulls to the gods, you can buy one of the 11 additional cards, only one of which can be in your deck, so you can have one of each type of card. And they each have their own unique abilities, ranging from being able to increase your favor, to move opponents, to converting opponents to your own using the siren. And the way you win the game is by completing at least one of each of the victory conditions. The victory conditions are in 3 different categories. One is based upon area control, one is based upon combat, and one is based upon the favor to the gods. When you complete one, you put your token on it. These ones are absolute and is just control this many. The combat ones are majority, such as have the most skulls, have the most hoplites in the underworld, and have the most hoplites on the map. And the favor is a specific requirement of favor, such as have 8 favor, have 3 of at least 2 gods, or have at least 1 favor of every god. One thing that makes this game special is your hoplites are a limited resource, and when they die, they go to the underworld. Now, if you're familiar with Greek mythology, the underworld is occasionally reached, and the hoplites can be brought back. If you bribe Charon and use his fairy, you can bring your hoplites back to your supply and then they can be respawned onto the board later. Otherwise, they're stuck in the underworld forever. The last option you can do on your turn is to rest. And to rest, you pick up all the cards that you have discarded, put them back into your hand, and they can be used again for the rest of the round. And through all these means, if you're managed to meet at least 3 at the beginning of your turn, then you win the game immediately, and the game is over, and you have joined the gods at Mount Olympus.
Thank you, Travis. I'll start by saying you have a very tough task. That has a lot of different parts, right? Again, there's a lot of things that are important, and pitching that to a publisher successfully is a very tough task. I certainly have never had to do it, and I'm thankful because it's a tough task. But I'll move on. I think that the one thing that I'm trying to process is all of the information, right? One of the questions I had was, how many cards do I start with in my hand? Another question was, what's a half-life? And then started to think about all the games that this sort of reminds me of and relates to, and that's what you don't want to happen in the pitch, right? You want to be able to segment all of the information, and like I mentioned before, just kind of guide a publisher through what the story of the game is. And one thing that I think a lot of us already know in here, including you probably, is pitching to the right publisher is very important. I'm not a publisher, but if I was, this would probably not be a game I was interested in because I don't like heavy games with dudes on maps. And that is something that you would research before pitching to me, right? And if Joe was a publisher who loved that, you would pitch this to Joe, right? And that's just a point of me saying it's very, very important to research publishers beforehand, know what they like, know what they dislike, know what their catalog already has, and know why your game fits for that publisher. And again, that isn't a note for this because I'm not a publisher, but it's just a note for everyone, right? Kind of like Jay, I looked at this and this probably isn't my kind of game. But as you went through it, I started thinking about like, what is it that speaks to me and what does it remind me of? And the funny thing about that is all the parts and how they seem to fit together actually remind me of my favorite game of all time, which is Concordia. And Concordia has a bunch of different systems, and if you describe them all kind of in the way you did, I actually don't think people would get it. It's, oh, you trade, you build, you do this, you do that. But Concordia's pieces are fit together almost beautifully. And what I'm realizing is I don't know how I would pitch Concordia. It's kind of funny. And so, but I think coming up with that narrative to say, here's how this game fits together and makes the player feel, and what, the primary things that they're trying to accomplish, and why these things work together well, is what you would need to do if, as Jay mentions, you're talking to the right publisher for this. Concordia is the same way. The vast majority of publishers, Concordia wouldn't be a fit for them. It's a classic, but most publishers, it wouldn't be the right fit. But there are some for which it's obviously would be a wonderful fit. And knowing how you're going to put those pieces together and say, what is the story this game is telling? You do a good job of telling the story of the mythology, I think, but less it's the story of what the gameplay is really going to play out and be like. And that's what I would think to work on.
Did anyone else keep hearing hot plates? Like, was that just me, or did everyone else kept hearing hot plates? And I was like, I don't get it.
I think Joe's just hungry.
What was the word?
Hoplite. Have you played Sid Meier's Civilization?
No.
Hoplite is the word for a Greek soldier.
Okay. I just kept hearing hot plates, and I'm like, your hot plate goes to the underworld, and I'm like, weird, dude.
It's the mask, I swear.
Yeah. So I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit. Are you, like, in your mindset, are you pitching this, or are you trying to take this to Kickstarter yourself?
Pitching.
Okay. If you could sign this with a publisher right now, who would it be?
Cool me or not.
Ambitious. And also good, because one thing that I wanted to tell you, right, is like, you've got skulls on spikes in your prototype, which will get people's attention. If you pitch this to me, I would immediately go, no. like out the gate. I'm like, I don't know what it is. I don't care how good it is. Like, any game with skulls on spikes is just, I'm out, right? Like, it's just not, like, we try to be a lot of publishers try to be very family friendly and stuff like that. And some, go hard the other direction. Like Van Ryder's made, a couple of notable horror movie themed games that have a lot of gore and stuff in them. So definitely all publishers, but it's a hard thing to overcome, is like brutal violence depicted in games, right? But yes, Cool Mini or Not would definitely be a company like that. One thing that I think your pitch, like they kept saying like, oh, it's hard to draw all these elements together. It's hard to like thread that needle for publishers to like understand what they're looking at. And what my suggestion would be is pull in other games that are doing things similar to what your game does, right? And again, I don't want that necessarily up front. I don't want you to be like, this is Blood Rage meets, blah, blah, blah. Like, that's the worst thing, because like that also like tunes me out if that's the first thing. But when you're describing this mechanic and be like, oh, like in such and such game, or like in such and such, right? Like that sometimes will help me ground all of these different mechanics into a more like, okay, yeah, I've heard of that game, or at least I've played that game, or I've seen what that mechanic does, and would help me get a little bit more bearing on it. So that's definitely something that I would recommend. And good luck with the hot plates.
I seeing a question over here?
Yeah. If possible. So,
Quick one.
yeah, just a quick question for Travis.
Yeah.
Another ubiquitous legend in Greek mythology that was never like mentioned, but I just kept hearing over and over again, was that of Hercules and 12 labors. So if you ever thought of introducing that in your pitch as a way to kind of pull it together and really get a publisher or anyone else your pitches to know like really what's going on, because that it sounded a lot of what you were talking about.
I'm quiet. So I have considered calling them labors. In my playtest, I have found that a majority of people have not heard of the myth of Hercules' 12 labors, and it also kind of contradicts that there's only 3. And so if you are someone who historically knows of the 12 labors and you want it to be historically accurate, then you're probably going to not like that there's only 3. So I'm tempted to call them labors, and people didn't understand, so I just called them conditions.
Thank you.
All right. Next up, we have Andrew Ernst and Cyberscape. Give it up for Andrew and Cyberscape.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Ernst. This is Cyberscape. I just want to say, it would be easier to pitch these flat games if we could somehow put them on magnets. Put them on the wall. So, Cyberscape, it's a deck builder worker placement game set in a dystopian world. So players are in some sort of simulated reality that's on a time loop. So think Groundhog Day meets The Matrix, or maybe Edge of Tomorrow meets Dark City. Pick your 2 movies that you like. In this game, because it's a deck builder worker placement, the cards in your deck are your workers. So that's one of the unique mechanical hooks to the game. The other mechanical hook to the game is a lot of worker placements. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with worker placements, but usually you have a bunch of action spaces throughout the round, and less spaces become available. This is actually opposite of that. So at the beginning of every round, there's only 4 spaces available. And based on where players decide to go, it actually opens up action spaces. So yeah, you get to do this really cool thing Like say you go to this space, but you're gonna open up options for all the other players to go to. So throughout the round, the options actually open up, and it kind of ebbs and flows. So halfway through the round, some of them close back up and then open up. It just kind of depends on where players decide. The third mechanical hook, I would say, is there's multiple markets. So at the beginning of the game, you have access to all these cards. It's kind of like they're like open market of cards. You have to actually gain access to all these other cool cards that do cool effects. And because you can use the cards in your deck as workers, they can do really cool things. So maybe you get to take an action twice, you get to go to a space where another player's already taken. Maybe you get to go to a space that's not unlocked yet, things like that. The game takes about 35 minutes per player. So, was it 3 players? You're looking at a little under 2 hours. 4 players, you're looking at about 2.5 hours. So it's on the longer side. The game, it's broken down into 2 phases. So we have the first phase, which is comprised of player actions, and then we have the second phase, which is the influence phase. So all these cards, so every one of your cards can be played in one of 2 ways, either played as a worker, and in which case you're going to be looking at its influence during the influence phase, or you're going to be playing it into your play area for some sort of action. So you also have multi-use cards. I'm not going to go into the finer details of how you score points, but at the end of 3 rounds, everyone has taken 15 turns. So you have about 15 turns to build up that engine and score your points. And that's Cyberscape.
This is nothing like Pokemon. I'm glad I got a laugh because I was like,
Wait, did they tell you all the names that were like?
Should I not have? Was that, oh shoot! I'll take
I've been fed a lie. Let's talk about the importance of a sell sheet. First publisher that put a sell sheet in my hand. Sell sheets are very important. If you ever hear somebody tell you that sell sheets are not important, they're lying to you. They're not your friend. They are mean, and they don't want you to sign any games with any publishers because they want you to fail. Sell sheets, so important. The number one thing, I get emails every single week, dozens of emails that are like, I have a game that I think fits blah, 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 blah. And that's great. Send me your sell sheet, please. Send me your sell sheet, please. That's all. Like I don't want to know. I don't want to read paragraphs about your game. I don't want to. Just send me your sell sheet, right? And a good sell sheet helps a lot. I have right here. Like, let's talk about what's good about this game, right? I have the player count, I have the time, and I have the age. He doesn't need to tell me that now because I can see it right here. Like nice big bullet points. That's great, right? I have kind of a picture of the game. I get kind of an idea of what type of game it is. I'm like, oh, there's a market of cards. It's probably a deck builder. There's places to take actions. You're doing worker stuff. Got it. I have kind of a thematic paragraph here. The component thing, I wouldn't necessarily know is that important. I would maybe put something in that place that's like more about like what makes my game special. Here's 3 reasons that my game is the best game that you're ever going to play and why it's going to make you millions of dollars, right? Those are things I want you to tell me, right?
I've heard conflicting thoughts on that. Some publishers really want to know exactly what it's going to cost them.
I mean, I can. But I can kind of look at your game and guesstimate like about how much it's going to cost, right? I'm like, I see all of that. That's helpful, but like maybe make it double-sided to have, because the one thing that this is missing is you telling me like what is special, right? Like what are the cool mechanics of the game? Like this doesn't have much in here what the mechanical hooks of the game are. You mentioned worker placement and area control and deck building, but those are just terms, right? They're not telling you why those things are special for your game. So those are kind of the things that I would talk about more. But like, thank you very much for the sell sheet, because as a publisher who's going to take 50 pitches at Gen Con, I'm going to take all of these, I'm going to put them in my backpack. I'm not going to think about them right after that pitch, but I'm going to get back to the office. I'm going to answer a bunch of emails, and I'm going to go into the conference room. I'm going to pull all of these out, and I'm going to start looking at them. I'm like, Cyberscape. Okay, I remember that game. I remember that pitch. Let me think about if it's A, good for my company, B, what I liked about it. And that's how I'm going to kind of like form my yes, no pile and maybe follow up and say, hey, can you send me that prototype, right? Sure. Sell sheet, incredibly, incredibly, incredibly important.
The part that pulled me in with this in the first place was the time loop. And I know there are a number of games out there playing a little bit with time travel these days. And as a designer, I find it fascinating to figure out how you actually do that, because you're playing linear time. I mean, how do you do that? And so that to me was one of the most fascinating things about it. And pulling in the movies and everything hooked me more. And so that's the part I wanted to know more about. And as I'm reading your sell sheet and like reflecting on what you said, I think I'm starting to see where that fitted.
Yeah, I kind of forgot to mention, at the end of the round, all the spaces relock. So everything kind of relocks and everything reopens.
Yeah, and once I was reading the sell sheet, as Joe was talking, since he was on the sell sheet, I see that that's mentioned, although I think even here it doesn't really say that is the time loop. It's only they reset. But I would lean into that more to show why the mechanics that you have are selling that time loop mechanic, because I think that could be really, really cool. I don't know that. I would be wanting to dig into the game more, but that's what I would be looking for as a player is, hey, well, this is going to be really cool. How does this work?
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah.
Who here has played the game Anachrony by Mind Clash Games? Right? The whole selling point of that game was like, oh, it's time travel. You have time travel, right? And you can like send yourself resources from the future, but in the future you have to have those resources or you form paradoxes. And everyone's like, this is amazing. This is so cool. This is so great. And then my friend told me, it's just a loan. Like, it's literally the same as taking a loan. And I was like, you just ruined that game for me. But they sold it, right? They sold that mechanic very well from a thematic standpoint. And it really, really worked. And I think is like a big reason that game did really well is they did a good job dressing it up. So like, yeah, I agree. Like that time loop, that is a selling point. Hit it hard.
As a graphic designer, you did a very dangerous thing by handing me a because I absolutely agree with Joe and Randy. Sell sheets, make them, use them, keep them, live by them, die by them. I have feedback for you that I'm not going to give you right now on your sell sheet. They've already said. Use it to tell less about the story and highlight what are the key things that make your game unique. Personally, I wouldn't put the components on there, especially when you have counts like 125 resource tokens or 188 cards. Those aren't things that's going to make a publisher say, oh, I want to look at that twice or 4 times, right? Even if it's in the game, that's fine. Something they can deal with and kind of not find out from the sell sheet. That's personally how I would do it. I would just add in more pictures of the really cool things. You have one picture, I would add like maybe a spread of cards or, talk a little bit more about what I found is the most interesting part is when you go to a worker placement space, you open up more. That's the time travel stuff I want. I want to mess up. I want to make a new world. Like mess up time as much as possible. And I think your game it's extremely interesting to me because I love deck builders. But I think this definitely pulled me away. If I were given a pitch, I would wait until after the pitch to give this to a publisher in a real life situation. Obviously, this is just for us to look and give you feedback on. But yeah.
Did you say give the sell sheet after the pitch?
Yeah, after the pitch is over.
Oh, I like having it right away.
You like having it?
I like that's the first thing I say when I sit down in games is like, do you have a sell sheet? So that's just my own personal.
The advice is ask them. You want the sell sheet now.
That's a good way. Yeah.
All right.
All right, thank you again to Andrew Ernst and
So next we have Matt Kambick with License to Krill.
I'm gonna risk it.
And if you want to see his French sell sheet, he's got a great one, in my opinion. But I'm not a publisher.
I think good job. Pretty good. Wait, how's everyone doing? Good. I think I'm the last one, so I'll make it quick. This is License to Krill. I'm very excited to show it to you. It's a game I've been working on about 2 years. We are krill, living in the bottom of the ocean, trying to survive, trying to get the most points, and trying to survive this guy. He looks cute and cuddly. Some people would agree, but he does love nibbling on our cards, and he will be eating our cards throughout the game. So there's a hot potato mechanic where the whale is swimming around, and you have to kind of navigate the whale while amassing the most points. I've already set up the game in a typical 3-player setup, so I have 3-player setups here. Each player has a little player card, and then they have 3 cards that they call their own. And one up here is the market, called the river. And on your turn, it's an open draft, an open market draft, where you take a card, whichever one looks best for you. Maybe it's a card that helps you do set collection. Maybe it's a card that helps you do an action, which leverages getting rid of a card you want, or getting a card from another player that you would desire. You play that in front of you immediately, so there's no hands. It's immediate play. But then coupled with the card, which is what I think is interesting in the game, is that you also control what the whale will do on that same action. So you might want to go for a card that is really the best card for you and most efficient for points, but it also moves this cute guy near you, and now you have to flip the top whale card, which may be one of the event cards that causes him to eat and eliminate one of your cards, and he always loves it when that happens. When the whale swims around, he's always in between 2 players, so he's never targeting 1 player. He's always interestingly targeting 2 players at the same time. And in the bottom of the deck, to end the game, is the Krilling Time card. There's a bunch of cards. It's very heavy on the puns, as the sell sheet will tell you. So one of these, they all have the actual whale terms. Sky hopping, logging is the whale term for sleeping, so tried to base it as much as I could on the actual whale terminology. But the Krilling Time is the only one you really need to be worried about. We shuffle that, we make that the bottom 5 cards. We take some other cards based on player count, we shuffle those and put them on top. That constitutes the deck. So you know about when the game is going to end. It's the last 5 cards, but you don't know exactly when the game is going to end. So it leaves a little bit of a suspense towards the end, especially if you're collecting the sardines, which normally starts at a very negative score, but the more you get, suddenly they become very positive and very economical for you, but you got to kind of gauge, how long you hold out to get those particular types of cards. So on a typical turn, it's very simple. You look at your player board and decide which card in the river you like. You draft that card out of the river. You stick it in front of your player board. You do the action if it has one. Then you do the whale action. In this case, I'm moving the whale away. Directionality, I tried left, right. Some players got confused. I tried clockwise, counterclockwise. It made my wife very confused. So I have a system where I have a rock and a coral symbol printed on the player card. So you just know you move it in the direction as indicated by the symbol. So I have 2 9-year-olds and a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, and they all get it pretty well, but maybe because Daddy's been playing games with them for so long. After your turn is over and you've done the whale action, you flip the top whale card. In this case, it's a market refresh called a tail slap. What happens is the card closest to the end moves away. These cards slide down, and then 2 new cards come out, and it's the next player's turn. It takes about 5 minutes per player, and larger player counts, maybe that stretches to about 6, but it's pretty tight to about 5 or 6 minutes, so you can really gauge, maybe it's the first game of the night, how long it's going to take to play with your friends. If you want, you can play up as many as 5 or 6. In a 2-player game, since there has to be always in between this, you can't, with 2-player games, have the whale just always in between you and the other player. So there's a dummy hand, and that way there's like 3 hands. So the 3-player game plays just like the 2-player game. It probably shines the most at the 3, 4, 5-player count, but it's got the versions for 2 to 6 as well. The one thing I like is I've played this game probably 100 times in the last 2 months, went to a couple conventions. I haven't gotten tired of playing it because there's still some interactions with the cards that I haven't even predicted yet, where I play this card and the other player will figure it out, and they'll play another card, and then it's like, oh, and then it triggers, and then they end up with the most points. And in fact, I've seen a lot of games where the player that initially is dealt some cards starts with what looks like the lowest amount of points and also ends up winning at the end. So it is a bit unpredictable. Generally, the better player will rise to the top, but there's enough randomness going on, just enough sprinkled in to keep things interesting. So that's License to Krill. Thanks so much for listening, and if you have any questions, I'd love to hear.
Am I correct that you were the raffle winner who?
Yes.
Wow.
I put it in the card just in case.
Yeah, good job. You handed me a sell sheet, and I'll say your sell sheet is splendid in my opinion. It uses a lot of things that just really work. You have very short, small paragraph sentences, lines, very, very punchy to the point things. And it's very well developed. I don't know if you have graphic design background, etc., but your hook area has a hook on it. Like that just makes sense. You can't do that for every game, and it works for yours. But wow, it's just really well done. Did you use a tabletop simulator picture for your picture? Very smart, very smart. I recommend if you have your game digitally, use those photos for your sell sheet. It's what I do. It's what he does. Clearly, it might be a good idea. No, I think your pitch was extremely solid too. You told the story of what your game is about and how it plays, and it's just really well done.
I echo a lot of what Jay said, especially about the sell sheet. I think I've gotten decent at putting good information on sell sheets, but you have an organization about it that I wouldn't be able to approach, and I really appreciate that. It came out really well. I think the target for this game is very, very clear. I've spent a good bit of time playtesting Flat Out's coming title Deep Dive, and it reminds me of that, both in the target audience, a little bit of the push your luck, and various things, and I think there's a very, very big market for such games. They have to be kept at a pretty low price, which looking over this, I don't see why that can't be done. So I think that's very good. And the one thing for me lacking from the pitch, which I think in a real pitch you would have, would be the stepping through of the turns. Like I get that's the general idea. I feel like there's like the one missing link is to see some of the turns actually in action, which of course you would do if I was sitting across the table from you. So very good.
Are you pitching or are you going to Kickstarter?
I'm pitching, but I'm going on the guise that maybe no one picks it up, and then my plan B is Kickstarter.
Okay. The hot potato mechanic is great. That's something that you don't see very often. It's very unique to your game, where you kind of have this stuffed whale that you're passing around the table, and it's like this little hot potato item that you don't want to get stuck with the whale, so you're constantly moving it around. Genius. Do not let us, if a publisher says that they want to take the stuffed whale out of the game, walk away. And I mean that, because that stuffed whale and the hot potato mechanic going around the game is what's going to make people look at your game, see that game and go, what game is this? And then go buy that game. That is, I just wanted to tell you and commend you on the idea and the execution of it, because that is a beautiful thing. It really is. And you've kept all the rest of the components very, very small, very, very minimal, so you could afford to do a cheap plushie in the game that people are passing back and forth and still make it a very affordable, family-friendly price of possibly $19.99 or something like that, which is kind of where you want to hit with a game like this that's that fast, but also has a really cool component thing in it. I would highly recommend just leaning as hard as you can into every pitch with a publisher for that thing, and look for publishers that have also already done really cool, unique components with plushies or big things, right? Like companies that lean heavily into that toy factor when you're pitching, because they would have already seen success with that, and then finding a game that uses it mechanically as a part of the game, they're gonna light up, and that's really gonna be what your target's gonna feel. Is that's where your sweet spot is. So congratulations on everything, but also I have no doubt that if you pitch as well as you did today to the right publishers, that this will probably be signed by the end of the year.
Oh, I saved the best for last. This is the game case.
That was mic drop. Mic
The whale.
I got it off of Amazon, but I had to undo the stitching, and I took a dollar store bag and hot glued it in there.
was our last.
Yeah.
It was our evening. Randy, I was privileged to play Cascadia as one of the last playtests before the pandemic, so I was curious, how many times did you pitch Cascadia before it was picked up?
You come to my talk
Oh, yeah,
tomorrow.
sorry.
You should come to my talk tomorrow. I actually don't know the answer, the exact answer, but it fits on the palm of my hand. Now, this is very different. There's a reason for this, which is I went to Origins and pitched it. And although I pitched it at a local convention once, I don't really consider that a full pitch. I don't remember if I pitched it to 2, 3, 4 publishers, but it was something around there. No bites whatsoever. And then I was getting ready for Gen Con. I was prepared to do a lot of pitching and all of this when Flat Out came to me and said, we'd like to make this our second game. What do you think? I had Flat Out having not published a single game. And keep in mind, these are friends of mine that I wanted to work with. I did not answer them right away. I took a couple weeks. I mean, I was very upfront with them about this and all of that. And in the end, I don't know. It's a combination. I really wanted to work with the folks from Flat Out. They're amazing designers, and I could see they really were structuring their company in a way that was going to be a lot of fun. And I also think I was a little lazy. It was like, if I go ahead and agree to this, I don't have to pitch at Gen Con. I can go do other things at Gen Con. And so that's kind of how that played out. To Breeze, I pitched at my first Gen Con. I had 8 meetings, and I signed it at Gen Con. So my experience is not necessarily typical in this regard. But let me give you the flip side. I have 4 unsigned games that I've probably pitched a total of 100 times.
I will say one of them is one of my favorite games I've ever played, Rolling Up Roses.
It's broken because I can beat Randy.
But it's still an amazing game.
It's the Ben heuristic. so yes, it's a little bit skewed to look at the 2 games that I have signed. Really look at the ones that I haven't, which I'm still actually confident in with the right publisher in the right spot. I think they would work really, really well. And so I've had a ton of rejections of those games. Right, Joe?
Yeah.
And going from that, we have Schoon with a question for Joe.
Actually, I'm going to cut in with a question for Jay. Sorry,
No.
going off book here.
Around.
So, Jay, something got brought up. You mentioned a few different times that you were a graphic designer.
Yes.
And Randy mentioned advice that I had received early on when I was doing designing, and I still think you can find on the internet everywhere, which is mechanics, forget about the art. And I think, so personally, I have a background in video games, where they both develop simultaneously. So you see the ways that the art influences the mechanics influence the art. So personally, as a graphic designer, and yes, maybe I'm setting him up for this, where do you fall on that advice with your personal experiences and your personal skills? Should you, mechanics first, forget about the art, forget about the design, or do you think they evolve to support each other?
Before I answer the question, I just want to say that I've been thinking all day how much I love your jacket. I'm a jacket guy, and you might lose it. But yeah, that's a very good question, because it's a question that comes up a lot. And I am on the team that says graphic design absolutely matters. Art and illustration, not so much, especially early on. If you're pitching, absolutely, this is the case. If you're going to Kickstarter and such, this is absolutely not the case. You need to think about your art for sure if you're going to crowdfunding on your own. But no, graphic design makes the game easier to play when it's done right. If you guys come and see my prototype for Ludocraft, it's in pencil, it's in black and white, but the graphic design will let you know where every space is and exactly how the game works. So yes, if you don't have any skills in graphic design, practice up just a little bit on YouTube, or find someone who will help you for cheap or for, I don't know, a lunch date or something. And just think about
how the graphic design can help your game play easier. Because that's half the battle, right?
Can I follow up on that? Yeah, I think Jay followed on the point that I was making earlier actually incredibly well. Because to me, it's about the publisher or the playtester looking at the game and getting it. And fancy art, it's cool and it might help sell your game. I'm not going to say it's not going to, it probably would. But it's a lot more work actually than the graphic design is. And it's actually easier. It's like I don't want to diminish graphic design. Thing to do incredibly well. But the basics aren't actually all that hard. And I think you can learn what are the different card layouts and why do we have card layouts like this? What does this mean? Why are things on the left on cards often? And what does fanning mean? Why and does that matter to my game? And what are the different ways? How are these cards going to be set down? So I'm just focusing on cards, but this applies to most components, tiles, all of this stuff. Because you want someone to look at that game, whether it's your tabletop simulator, photo, or you've got that sitting in front of them, and you don't want them going, wait, what's that? What's this? What's that? And so lean into things like the Noun Project or GameIcons.net, various ways to pull these things. Don't go off and draw that stuff yourself, unless that's your thing, which is great. But beg, borrow, and steal the stuff that you need. But really think about how does this look and how does it read and how will it make the game easy to play and understand.
For the love of God, please do not spend a lot of money on art for your prototype. Please do not do that, because it's not as good as you think and we're gonna change it anyway. Like, if you spend $4,000 getting art for your prototype, that is $4,000 that you aren't going to get back. Because honestly, a publisher that wants to keep the art from a prototype version of a game to go to print with, I'm not saying don't sign with that publisher, but that is not what major publishers do. We're going to hire professional artists, professional graphic designers to do all of that work for you. You just need to get the game to a place that is pitchable, right? And that's fuzzy area there, but pitchable is what you're aiming for, not I want to put a fully illustrated game in front of a publisher, because that's a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of times a lot of money that isn't going to get you very far.
All right, so hold on to the microphone. So we got one more question specific for Joe. Thinking back, so you have accepted a lot of pitches, as you alluded to multiple times. What are kind of either the standout, oh my God, this was the greatest pitch that has ever been, or at least some kind of highlights? Here are some particularly high points that I've gotten in pitches.
Last year at UNPUB, Peter Hayward was here, and Peter Hayward said, I designed, he talked to me at Gamma, he showed me a couple of his games, none of them were a good fit. And we just spent a little bit of time talking about what our company is looking for in games. He went home, we were at UNPUB just a couple of weeks later, and he said, I designed this game for you. And I played it, and I said, this is an interesting thing. And about a week later, I gave him a call, and I said, hey, we're taking it. That game, we sold 10,000 copies to Barnes & Noble like that. We printed another 10,000 copies ourselves that's going to be releasing on Amazon May 1st. So that is honestly one of the things that stands out the most is when somebody says, I learned what your company did and I went and designed a game for your company. And that, I would hate for someone to do that and then me be like, yeah, you didn't really get it, right? But
if you did not know the person saying that, would that have carried any weight at all?
It's going to carry a lot more weight than somebody that's just pitching me a game out of the blue, right? I appreciate when, if somebody, it makes a lot of difference to me when I'm getting pitched and the person pitching can say something like, I really like what your company is doing, and actually mention something real about what my company is doing. So for instance, right, we probably have stricter design adherence than any other publisher working today besides Button Shy. We print in 2 box sizes. That's it. We have a big box and a small box. All of our big boxes cost one price, $40. All of our small boxes cost one price, $20. All of our games have a 4-page rule sheet, no more, no less, that's it. Those are things that every single game that we've ever made follows those strict design adherences. And when I'm being pitched by somebody that knows that, to me, I'm like, okay, this person did their research. And if somebody does their research, that's going to stand out to me more than here, right? Like the one thing that's just an automatic like annoyance to me is when somebody's like, okay, I'm going to pitch you a game. And they start putting down this like big 2-hour euro in front of me. And I'm like, do you know nothing about my company? Or like, oh, this is my 4X space. And I'm like, please, why are you wasting my time and your time? I'm not going to sign it. I don't want to sit here and listen. I have limited time at a convention that's very valuable to me. And listening to a pitch about a game that I can't sign because of my company, we're just not doing each other any favors. So again, it's nice that there's a little bit of research and at least knowing what kind of game to pitch to me, but like knowing that we have like certain things about our company that are important is something that kind of makes me stand out. Like, oh, this guy did his research, right?
Yeah, and I'll say as someone who's been pushed in front of you to pitch, I think the intimidation factor, and for anybody else who's kind of new to UNPUB or really seem like a lot of inside baseball. It can really seem like, partially because we're all friends, but and you are now one of them. Yep. You are now one of the friends. Like, count yourself in.
Friends.
Right? Welcome, friends. Welcome, all of you. That transition can seem intimidating. You've already made it. You've already made it, right? And like Jess said about doing the homework, right? I think that really is what it comes down to. Is that little extra step of like, oh, I went beyond just, we had a conversation at UNPUB and I learned a little bit more about Jay, how you do design, Randy, what these games, this Cascadia game is that you're talking about, and Joe, what it is that your company is really going for, right? So, once again, thank you so much to Jay Bell, Randy Flynn, Joe Wiggins. Thank you specifically to All Play for sponsoring Feedback Frenzy. And one final round of applause for the 7 people that stood up here and gave their picture first. And that, everyone, will do it for Feedback Frenzy this year. Thank you so much for coming. Enjoy UNPUB 2023.
Does anybody else want a lollipop?